everyone! So I recently came out as autistic on social media, and most of the responses were really lovely and supportive, but there were a few responses that I could tell people meant well by, but they kind of rubbed me up the wrong way. So I thought I'd make this video to sort of help people understand what you shouldn't say to autistic people, and at the end I've got some responses you could say instead. And this isn't just my opinion, I've consulted with other people in the autistic community. I'm in like forums and groups for that thing, and I've come up with a list of things that you shouldn't say and why you shouldn't say them, because why it's hurtful for autistic people to hear. And I want to stress that this video isn't made to make people feel bad if they've said these things in the past. So if you said these things to me, or if you said it to other autistic people, please don't feel bad. The purpose of this video isn't to shame people, it's more to educate people and make them more aware, so in any future interactions with autistic people, they can say the right thing and avoid causing any hurt. So everybody's a bit autistic, or everyone's on the spectrum, is probably one of the things I heard quite a lot, and it's one of the things that's most unanimously hated among the autistic community. Like, of everyone I spoke to, which is well over 100, one person didn't mind, nobody liked it, and everyone else hated it. And I'm going to start with the reasons why it's inaccurate. So I think a lot of neurotypical people, and neurotypical's basically not autistic, not neurodivergent. So basically I think a lot of people think the autistic spectrum ranges from not autistic to very autistic, when in actual fact it is a spectrum specifically for autistic people, ranging from presenting with these symptoms to presenting with other symptoms. Like, it's not a range of how autistic you are, and it's not for non-autistic people. It's specifically to categorize the experiences of autistic people and how they differ within the autistic community. And then the other thing, everybody's a little bit autistic. It's just not factual. Like, there's a big difference between occasionally presenting with one symptom in a specific situation and constantly living with a condition that presents many of those symptoms and affects your entire life on a daily basis. So for example, you know, if you were walking for a really long time and your legs got tired and you had to sit down, you wouldn't say, I'm a little bit disabled. You just realise that in this specific situation, I'm tired and need to sit down. It doesn't make you, you know, part of the disabled community. And just like that, it doesn't make you part of the autistic community if you occasionally feel a bit socially awkward, or if you occasionally get really into something. And the other thing that really bothers us as the autistic community is the fact that it's basically saying you're not different. And the issue with that is we are. And we don't want to be considered not different, because by making such an emphasis on that, it makes it feel like being different's a bad thing. We just want acceptance of who we are as people. We don't want you to try and make us seem like we are the same as everyone else. We want you to recognise our differences, recognise how that affects us, and then just accept us for who we are, so we don't have to constantly, you know, change our entire personalities. And there's a thing called masking, which is basically where autistic people cover their autistic tendencies and try to act normal in public just so we're not judged and ridiculed. And that is a very common thing that even autistic children learn to do, because we've realised that our personalities aren't socially acceptable. So by saying, you know, everyone's a bit autistic, it really diminishes and invalidates our lived experiences as autistic people. So I didn't get this one myself, but a lot of other people that I spoke to in the autistic community said they've had people say it to them, and that is, you don't look autistic. Like, what does autism look like? The very phrase, you don't look autistic, implies that there is an autistic look, and that is often based on harmful stereotypes. So when someone says, you don't look autistic, they're pretty much just saying, you're not a young boy, you know, flapping your arms all over the place. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but the issue with that is that does not define the whole autistic experience. There's no one way for autism to present or for autism to look like. And the fact that TV and media tends to portray autism in very specific stereotypes has kind of caused the general public to believe that autism should look and present a certain way, and it actually makes it so much harder for people outside of that specific stereotype to get diagnosed. So for example, it's incredibly hard for people of colour, for women, for adults to get diagnosed, because nearly all the diagnostic professionals are looking for symptoms that more commonly present in young boys, because that is like the demographic that is seen to be, you know, the autism stereotype is an autistic young child male. And that's not the accurate experience. And so by saying you don't look autistic, you know, A, the fact that you're saying it, you're probably meaning it to be a good thing, meaning that looking autistic is a bad thing. And also it just basically means that you are honing in on those harmful stereotypes that don't suit the autistic community, and we need to sort of frame the autistic community, as a spectrum, and we need to be able to see that different autistic people will present differently, and for our differences to be accepted and understood among neurotypicals as well. So again, this is something that I saw quite a bit, and that other people in the autistic community saw a bit, and that is when we mention that we're autistic, someone will mention an autistic child that they know, and the issue with that is, I'm not a child, I'm an adult. As an autistic adult, I have way more in common with other neurotypical adults than I do with an autistic child, because I'm not a child, I'm an adult, and by comparing us with an autistic child, you're basically, you know, seeing autism through the lens of childish behaviours, and you're comparing us with children rather than comparing us with adults. And it's just, it's really kind of irksome. It's kind of hard to narrow down exactly why that bothers us so much, but it does, because we just want to be seen like other adults. We want to be accepted in our differences still as adults. We don't want you to see us as, oh, they're like this because they're childish or whatever. We just adults with different behaviours. The only exception to this is if you're a parent or a carer of an autistic child and you want someone to relate to the experiences that your kid's going through. That's okay, because you're kind of looking for support for your own situation. But if you're sort of casually mentioning an autistic child, you know, in comparison to us, that's when it gets like really annoying. Like, it's okay if you're trying to get, you know, help and support for your own situation, but, you know, please don't compare us to children. We're adults. We're just autistic adults. Similar vein to the previous one, another thing that I heard and that other autistic people have heard is autistic people are so lovely, and it's like, no, we're not. Some autistic people are lovely, some autistic people are not. You know, we're not one homogenous group. It's very frustrating when people seem to see autistic people as just one group. So saying any group of people is any trait, it's just defaulting into assumptions of them, and it's also really patronising. Like, you know, I don't need clarification that I'm lovely because I'm autistic. I just want you to see me as me and recognise that autism is part of who I am. And by saying, oh, autistic people are so lovely, it just kind of diminishes us into one thing, and it's very patronising, and yeah, just please don't do it. Please don't do it. Talk about me as a person and my traits, sure, that's fine. Don't try and narrow us down to autistic people are so blank, because autistic people are made up of a range of different personalities, a range of different people. We do not all fit into one characteristic. One really frustrating thing that we hear is, why do you want to put a label on it? And that is just like the most ableist, privileged thing you can say, because putting a label on it makes it seem like we have a choice to not be this thing. Like, whether we call ourselves autistic or not, we are autistic, and having a label allows us to recognize our situation and think, oh wow, I'm not broken, I'm just autistic. You know, it clarifies the experiences that we've already lived, that we've already experienced, and whether or not we put the label on, we would still have autism. And by putting that label on, it means that we're able to understand ourselves better, and we're also able to share with other people so that they can, you know, be aware of our differences and account for that and make things more accessible for us, because our differences do affect how we interact with the world. And by having that level of accessibility, it makes it easier for us to fit into a society that is designed towards neurotypical people. And I actually once read a really great analogy for why labels are so important. And so there was this penguin, and he was raised among sparrows, and all the other sparrows around him could fly. And the whole time he was thinking, I can't fly, I'm a broken sparrow. And then one day he finds a body of water, and he sees his reflection, and he sees that he's a penguin. And then he realizes he can swim. He's a really great swimmer, and none of the other sparrows can swim. So instead of being a broken sparrow who can't fly, he's an excellent penguin who can swim. And then someone else says, why do you want to put a label on that? You're all just birds. And by saying you're all just birds, it forgets the fact that penguins can't fly. It's physically impossible for them to do so, but there are other things like swimming that they're really good at that the other birds, the sparrows, can't do. So instead of embracing their differences and embracing the things that make them special and unique, it's trying to boil them down to stuff that would otherwise not make them feel good, that would make them feel broken. So by allowing us to put a label on ourselves and say, yes, we are autistic, it lets us experience life to the fullest, it lets us recognise what we can't do and recognise what we can do, and really push ourselves to be the best that we can be. It's not something we're choosing to be, we're not choosing to be autistic, we are autistic, and by putting a label on it, it allows us to live life to the fullest. So again, this wasn't one that I personally experienced, but it came up among other autistic people, and this was, you can't be autistic because you have or don't have insert specific stereotype here. So one, for example, you can't be autistic because you have empathy. And it's just a very negative stereotype that autistic people aren't capable of empathy, because we are. You know, I really care a lot about what others feel, and some of the time I might struggle to know exactly what that is. If it's a particularly nuanced emotion, I might sometimes misread the situation, but that doesn't mean I don't care. It doesn't mean that I don't want to help them. It just means that sometimes I have difficulties recognizing that, and even then, not all autistic people do. Some autistic people have made it a real goal of theirs to learn the different ways that people express emotion, and are really good at knowing what other people are feeling, and are really good at showing empathy for what those other people are feeling. And so by narrowing autism down into you can't be autistic if you have empathy, it really, like I said earlier about the autistic spectrum, some people will have some symptoms, some will have other symptoms, and so by saying you can't be autistic because you don't have this specific symptom, it basically just negates the entire experience of all the other symptoms they may be presenting with and they may be living with. So you as a non-autistic person, or even as an autistic person, can't tell another autistic person they're not autistic because they're not presenting in the way that you view autism. So those were the things that came up most, either within my own experiences of telling people or within the other autistic people in the community that I spoke to. And there were other things as well, but they're kind of usually either smaller or fitting within one of the other categories I've mentioned. But basically just avoid saying anything that either diminishes their experience or fits into negative stereotypes, or even any stereotypes of what you think an autistic person should look like. Trust their lived experience, essentially, and don't try and diminish or invalidate what they're going through. So now we've discussed things that you shouldn't say to autistic people, here are some of the things that people have said to either me or other autistic people that I've spoken to that have really worked well for us. So this one was a lovely one that I received. It's thank you for sharing that with me. And that's just so simple, and basically it recognises that I am choosing to share a part of myself that I could have chosen to keep a secret, and I'm trusting that person enough to share it with them. So basically if someone shares with you that you're autistic, you can just say thank you for sharing that with me, because it recognises they've shared something with you, and if you don't have something else to add on the topic, that is perfectly fine and acceptable. Yep, it's as simple as that. You can just say cool. It doesn't necessarily need a response. If you haven't got anything else to add, don't try and force yourself to add some kind of deep, meaningful thing. You can just say cool, which lets the person know that you understand they're autistic, and yeah, you can just move on. You may not want to sort of stay in the topic, you may be uncomfortable, not sure what to say, and that is perfectly fine. You can just say cool and move on. This was a really lovely one that someone said to me, and it basically just really validates everything I'm feeling. You know, I'm really glad you've got a label for what you're going through, and it basically recognises the importance of understanding your own experience through the lens of what is causing you to experience that. You know, knowing that you're autistic helps you reframe all your experiences in a more positive light. So instead of thinking, oh my gosh, I did so badly in that situation, why was I like that? You now know why you are like that, and you can, you know, adapt for the future, and you can just recognise that it's okay for you to not always be perfect in situations, because being autistic will affect how you do interact with other people. And so by saying I'm glad you have a label for that, it recognises the importance of being able to understand your own experiences. So basically saying anything along the lines of, I still view you in the same way, or you're still the same person that I always knew, it basically just validates that you recognise that they have always been autistic, and they're not, you know, suddenly autistic out of nowhere, they just now have a word for it. And so by recognising that you still see them the same way, it will basically sort of quell any fears they might have of being treated differently, because we don't want to be treated any differently. We want to be treated in a nice way, in a positive way. I don't want someone like pussyfooting around me or thinking, oh my gosh, she's autistic, how do I interact with her? I just want to keep all my friendships the exact same way they've always been, but through the lens of people now understanding that maybe I'll occasionally say something insensitive without meaning to, and they can point that out to me and just recognise that it's not a personal thing. And so yeah, just let people know that you accept them just the way you are, and that will really, really help the autistic person know that they're still loved, know that they're still valid in your eyes. So I really hope that you found this video useful, and you now have a better understanding of what you could say to someone when they come out to you as autistic, and what you should avoid saying to make it worse for them. And like I said earlier, if you've said some of those things in the past, don't feel bad about it. You didn't know. It's something you wouldn't really think about as a neurotypical because you haven't had to live those experiences, and some of those things might have sounded positive to you in your eyes. And so being an ally isn't about always saying the right thing. It's about learning and then adapting for the future once you know what the autistic community has to say. So yeah, please do take on board these things for any future interactions you have with autistic people. It's not just my opinion, like I said, I spoke to lots of different autistic people within the community to make sure I was sharing a well-rounded video. And yeah, thanks so much for watching. Please do give it a like, drop a comment down below to say what you've learned from this video, and please do subscribe to the channel for more entertaining videos in the future. Bye bye.